I would like to say that I'm really thankful to Imaginative Film and Media Arts Festival, which is the largest Aboriginal film festival in the world. It's in Toronto, Canada. They did this program in October, and I was lucky enough to be in the audience. It was a fascinating event. They had people actually Skype videoing in questions, and there were over 300 people waiting in line to ask questions, coming from all over the world. It was fascinating. Today we're not doing that because Zach Kunuk, who is the director of the film, will be joining us to answer questions through Skype video. So he will be on the screen. The co-director, Dr. Ian Mauro, is here on site. And also we're very, very fortunate to have the National Museum of Natural History's Arctic Studies Center staff here to help us present this program. I'm going to invite Stephen Loring up now, anthropologist at the National Museum of Natural History. And later in the discussion, Igor Crooklyn, who has just arrived, will be answering questions and speaking with Ian Mauro after the screening. Stephen.
Thank you, Melissa. My name is Stephen Loring. I'm with the Arctic Studies Center at the Natural History Museum, Smithsonian. We're part of the dying breed of anthropologists who have been interpreting indigenous communities around the world for a century or more. What's exciting about the Indian Museum and the film and video program especially is the recognition that there's more and more talent coming out of indigenous communities to interpret their own culture and explain their views of the world and life, and it's a fascinating time to be involved. Zacharias, of course, is a giant in the indigenous film world. He started making films in the 1990s as sort of in response to having grown up and seen a remarkable series of films by Asin Balixi, who was a filmmaker that did the Nitsilic Eskimo series back in the 1960s. And most people that went to high school at that time saw one or another of the Nitsilic films. And Zacharias grew up, as did many Inuit people in the north, seeing these films and liking them, but sort of said, well, you know, those anthropologists, they get it slightly wrong. And Zacharias was inspired to do his own series, and he's just moved into another realm altogether now. His production team is called Izuma, it's I-S-U-M-A, Izuma TV. And if you Google either Zacharias Kunuk's name or Izuma, you'll get his website, and it's just fascinating. All his films are available. You can just sit there in the evening and watch them. More mosquitoes and ice and walrus and seals than you can imagine. But it's fascinating that the world has reached out that way. Most people know Zacharias' work because of his groundbreaking film Atanarjuat, The Fast Runner, which I had the honor of introducing in its Washington premiere in 2001. And also his more recent films, The Journals of Newt Rasmussen and Before Tomorrow. Atanarjuat won an award at the Cannes Film Festival and really sort of opened everyone's eyes to the tremendous potential in indigenous communities for telling their stories. So I think I'm just going to leave it at that. One little plug for the Indian Museum. They really set out, the whole intellectual baggage of this place is designed to recognize that indigenous peoples, Native Americans, Inuit, Native Hawaiians, are extant, viable, exciting, intact communities. And they wanted to tell their stories, not so much the way the anthropologists might tell, pulling out the old treasures from the collection. And if you're excited or intrigued at all about Zacharias' landscape and his environment, you can go up to the third floor, I think, where the Our Lives exhibit, one of the communities that they selected for the inaugural exhibit here at the museum is the community of Inuktitut. So when you've seen the film, you might want to go up and check that out. Ian Mauro, who's the co-producer and co-director and co-filmmaker of this project, is here with us. And I just asked him if he'd just introduce a few words about him and the project, and then we'll get right to the film. Thank you all very much.
afternoon, everyone. My name is Ian Mauro, and I'm coming here today from Canada. This is the U.S. premiere of Qapirangajuq Inuit Knowledge and Climate Change. So I'm thankful to the Smithsonian Institute and all their staff for bringing the film here, and I'm really happy to present it. Zacharias, as indicated, will be joining us on Skype from Igloolik. If you're not familiar with the geography of the Arctic, Igloolik is in the eastern Arctic, very far north of Quebec, and it's a beautiful community that I got the pleasure of living in while Zach and I edited the film. And we started this process about 2.5 years ago, and we shot the film in 4 different Inuit communities across Nunavut. And so there's elders from across the territory in the film, and it's a multi-dialectical film. I often like to say that the film is as much about language as it is about climate change itself, because we're connecting these communities through these different dialects, and then the film itself is subtitled in English. And so we're bringing these regional dialects together and then presenting it in English so audiences around the world can see it. And it's very exciting. The voice of elders in this room today. We're leaving in a couple days, going to New York, and we have another premiere in New York City. And so I'm just really thankful to be here. I'm really looking forward to having some discussions with you. And it's been interesting to interact with the larger community of people around this issue. Climate change is an issue that affects us all. And the film itself is about Indigenous knowledge, but as we'll discover through the conversation, it links with all sorts of different issues that are part of our daily lives. And I'm an environmental scientist. I have a PhD in environmental science, and Zach and I linking together, thinking through the complete suite of different knowledges that exist to deal with the issue of climate change. I think we'll have a provoking discussion with you, and I look forward to it. So thanks very much, and enjoy the film.
Thank you, everyone, for staying. I would like right now to introduce you to Igor Crooklyn, who is the curator of ethnology for Northern, Arctic, and Northwest Coastal collections at National Museum of Natural History here at the Smithsonian, and also a research ethnologist and the Arctic Study Center, and also Dr. Ian Mauro, the co-director of this film. We will be joined very shortly by Skype video by Zach Kunuk.
Thank you, Melissa. My name is Igor Crooklyn. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I've never been to the places that were featured in the film, but I work in other Arctic communities where the Inuit live. In Alaska, in Greenland, and also in Russia. So it is surprisingly familiar themes that we can hear all across the Inuit or the Eskimo world, and actually across most of the Arctic, if not all the Arctic. The studies of indigenous knowledge of climate change already have a short but very substantial history. So I would take a point with the film that scientists never listened to the Inuit knowledge. We actually did. Yeah. We actually did. We started listening to the Inuit knowledge at least since the late 1990s, because indigenous people were ahead of scientists. I mean, ahead of physical scientists, of climatologists, oceanographers, people who studied ice, in pointing out that the world is changing. This is very interesting. We have records from many conferences where scientists kept saying, well, it is still uncertain, we still don't know where it's moving. Yeah, we're still debating whether this is a short-term oscillation, it goes here, it goes with there. And the indigenous participants kept saying, well, it's changing. Just pay attention, please. You know, we live on the land, we watch that ice on the sea. And it wasn't until the early last decade, this past decade, when somehow both sides came to a certain agreement. They still have to come to the agreement regarding the polar bears, but that's another story. So, what is important in this beautiful, beautiful film, really? It is all in Inuktitut language, and there are 3 words that have been repeated again and again. One is, of course, Inuit, which is about the people. The other one is Siku, which is sea ice. And we did publish recently, just last year, a thick book which is called Siku, Knowing Our Ice, Inuit Sea Ice Use and Knowledge. So we do work with the Inuit in documenting the knowledge of changing ice, sea ice, and changing the use of sea ice because of global warming. And then there is the third word that was all the time in this movie, and this is the word sila or sfla or silfla. It depends upon the dialect. It is translated here as environment, but it has a much broader meaning in the Inuit language. It's the universe. It's everything outside. By translating it as environment, I'm sorry, Ian, you somehow modernized the concept, whereas to the Inuit people themselves, sila or sfla is everything that is around them. And that's a very, very deep, very philosophical and much broader kind of concept because it really includes everything. It includes the physical components of the environment, the sea ice, the sky, the earth, the animals, but also the spiritual feeling that people have regarding their life in the universe. So I would rather say the universe is changing, not the environment is changing, and that kind of gives us a slightly different tune on what is happening.
Well, we clearly should have had Igor on our team while we were making the movie. Some incredible insights there. I just want to point out that Zach is on the screen joining us from Igloolik, so I want to make sure that he gets involved here. So Zach, we've got a great full house full of people here in Washington, D.C. Do you maybe want to introduce yourself and maybe tell them why you wanted to make this film?
Well, my name is Zacharias Kunuk. The reason why we wanted to make this film was that, in Canada we had International Polar Year a few years back, and we applied and we didn't get accepted until we finally did. And we wanted to make this film because we kept hearing the Inuit saying these things that we thought that the southern world should know, and nobody was talking about it. There's scientists coming up north, sticking thermometers everywhere and doing their recordings, and they go back to their universities, and everybody sees their findings. But the Inuit, why we want to do it? It's because these people live up here all their lives, and in the Inuit culture, the first thing when you start walking, when you're a little bit bigger, we were taught to go outside and observe the sila, our atmosphere, because it's always changing. And these elders that we wanted to interview are the very people that's been doing that, whether they're men or women. So we kept hearing the sun is changing, it's getting warmer, the ice is thinning. We know that all the scientists have been saying that, but what Inuit were noticing was the sun. Doesn't set where it used to. But that's why we wanted to make this film.
Okay.
We better start questioning.
Yeah, I think that's what we want to do here. So yeah, let's do it. Anybody have a question for Zach, Igor, or myself? Yeah, do you want to speak into the mic? That's probably best if you can do that. Then Zach can hear your question, and people on the recording can hear the question. There we go.
Mataquiasin. Hello. Reuben Snake Jr., who was Ho-Chunk, said that all indigenous people are related regardless of where we come from on the earth. So we're all affected by the changes to the atmosphere. My question is this. Reuben Snake, in Your Humble Serpent, said that the biggest problems that we have is because linear thought was introduced. And linear thought allows, I'd say, the dominant population to think in terms of the environment and atmosphere as things separate. Indigenous people always saw that as connected. And we're seeing that the problems that are coming with the environment is because of the detachment that comes with linear thought. So my question is, at this point in time in history, do we have time to right this wrong?
That's a beautiful question. The microphone wasn't working super well at the beginning, so I just want to make sure Zach can hear. Zach, the question was essentially the difference between Inuktitut and Atanarjuat thinking around the environment, how indigenous thought is holistic, interconnected, whereas kind of Western Atanarjuat thinking is more linear. And given that we're at this very complex juncture with climate change, do we have the time really to kind of reconcile those different worldviews, and how do we maybe do it? Is that right? Did I kind of get that? Yeah. Yes. Do you want to take a crack at that, Zach?
Yeah, I'll take a first crack at it. In our culture, in the Inuit culture, everything is alive. And the earth is alive, the sea is alive, and the sky is alive. I always believe that, the average people, when they go down south, they always talk about Mother Earth, as if it's your mother or our Mother Earth. I always hear that. And I started to believe it. But if we put too much garbage on it, of course, it will cough. I believe it will cough it up.
Did we
That's my crack.
Okay.
I would like to make a little footnote to what Zach said. From my perspective, it's a little bit more complex than just two very different opposing systems, one of scientists and another one of the Inuit, because actually both systems are changing. We as scientists, if I may say of myself as we as scientists, are getting far more holistic, and we're learning from the Inuit and other indigenous people. And also indigenous people are learning from scientists and from science and from the media. Because in traditional Inuit storytelling, there were never anything like pollution, contamination, Kyoto Protocol, environment, global warming. They're very different words, and these words are kind of coming to the Inuit speech because of this interference with other systems of thinking. And actually back, let's say 100 years ago, if we were to ask the Inuit about what is happening with the environment, we would have been given very different answers. It wouldn't have been said that all changes are happening because people are not following the taboos, that they're behaving in a very kind of spiritually wrong way. there would be never words about global warming, atmosphere, water, climate, sea ice. It will be all about spirits. And we still have to figure out whether it is indeed because of the spirits that the world is changing or because of the global warming caused by pollution. So the jury is still out. But what I'm saying is that it's a discourse that is coming together. It's not like these are two different sides that are speaking across or against or beyond each other.
Yeah, and I'll take a crack at that. I think it depends who you talk to. You're obviously someone working at the juncture point between kind of science and indigenous thinking. You know, the polar bear issue, for example, when we screened the film in Churchill a number of months ago, and Martha Stewart was in Churchill shooting her show, and literally the world's top polar bear biologists came to Churchill because they were in her program, and we screened the film with these polar bear biologists, and in many ways we're in different universes. There's definitely a traditional kind of linear way of thinking about kind of ecological systems, and you know, some scientists who are trained in the past haven't had exposure to different ways of thinking. They're in a discipline. Universities struggle with it. You have literally, you know, a department here, a faculty here, and they're in silos. And they have trouble breaking out of those silos and thinking laterally, interdisciplinarily, in a way that kind of mirrors that indigenous way of thinking. And so institutionally, academics can structurally have problems jumping out into different ways of thinking. And we're seeing that. We're having discussions with scientists where we're hearing some crazy things, just really intense, you know, discrimination against this other way of knowing. That we have the answers. We're the scientists. We're the experts. We know what's going on. And we've in screening the film had those kinds of reactions, and they really wake me up to the fact that there are these divergent worldviews, and as much as we try to join them, they're still separate in some cases and in some disciplines. With that said, I agree with Igor. There's tremendous opportunities, and there are new generations of people who are taking on the task of trying to merge the two ways of knowing. And you know, you've been doing it for most of your career. There's people who have been doing it, but they've been the pioneers. It's not necessarily normal or standard, but it's happening. It's starting to happen. And in terms of the question of urgency, it needs to happen more. It needs to be the standard. And if we are going to navigate this time of incredible ecological and human complexity, we need every possible tool at our disposal. We need the best thinkers in the world, whether they're indigenous people, scientists, or anybody, young people, children, telling us what we need for our future to be healthy. And this film is a good example of it, because Zach and I sat down and made a film together. I'm a scientist. I'm a Qapirangajuq, a scientist. Zach's a man who grew up on the land. And we hammered this film out together, and we came up with some interesting kind of new ideas, I think, because of that collaboration. And we can talk more about that with respect to the sun and the changes to it. But yeah, maybe next question.
The question I have is, thank you so much again for sharing these insightful thoughts from the Inuit people. The question I have is the future, in terms of how people are coming together to strategize and think about what they're going to do in terms of adapting to this change that's going on. Especially in terms of what we heard about the mercury in the food sources. And you know, it's not easy to change the traditions of food and things like that. And then also the ice sheets, you know, getting thinner, the increasing polar bear populations. Has there been some kind of a gathering of the Inuit community where people have come together to start thinking about what are they going to do to adapt to these changes? And the second question was regarding the axis, the shifting axis. I'd never heard about this before, so if you can share any other research about this. Thank you.
Sure. I know that Igor's going to want to come in on this one because that's got a lot to do with his background. I want to make sure Zach knows that you're here. Igor Crooklyn is here. He's a researcher with the Smithsonian Institute, so that other voice you've been hearing is his. So how about we go to Zach around Inuit adaptation, community level planning around that. Do you want to shoot on that one, Zach?
Adaptation?
Yeah, adaptation, Inuit level adaptation. What's going on? How do we navigate the future, the communities in the north?
Like Ian said, born on the land, and 9 years of my life I was out there living like my ancestors used to live, but then dragged to school to learn English. It's changing fast. It's really changing fast. Things like the internet that we are using now, 3 years ago we never dreamt it, even though we were starting to handle computers. So we have to adapt to these. We have to adapt at the same time, go out on the land and know what to do, know how to get home in a blizzard. We have to know all this. Time is changing, so in the future, I don't know. I live day by day, and it's hard for me to talk about the future because you never know what it's going to be like. I guess we'll figure out how to combat this, but we also have to understand what I really noticed when we were making this film. When we were talking about climate change and warming, global warming, but the Inuit kept saying, I think it's coming from the sea. I mean, I think it's coming from the sea because the sea is warming. That since the ice brings more heat, that's what they were saying, and could very well be because there's going to be volcanoes here and there, and probably for the future. It's more, I say, more working together, understanding, trying to understand different cultures, because I've seen, I've heard a lot of languages where you don't understand a word what they're saying. We have to start understanding. Probably in the future we have to.
Cool. Well, maybe we'll pass it over to Igor for his views on adaptation.
Well, first of all, I would say that adaptation is not a word from the Inuit lexicon. It's a scientific word. So Inuit never thought or never spoke before about adaptation. That's not the way they're built and not the way the world is constructed. They never adapted as in the way we talk about this. They just lived. They changed. So to me, adaptation is a very different concept because it kind of, in a way, means something like mentally organized. You adapt through some kind of deliberate strategy. And although the Inuit definitely had deliberate strategies in dealing with their environment, it was never like we do adaptation 1 or we do adaptation 2. So the world was very different back then. Neither was this an Inuit pattern to get together and adopt a resolution what to do. This is definitely a modern world creeping in, that all indigenous people or all Inuit from different parts of the world get together, discuss what's happening, and make a decision or kind of sign an appeal what to do. Actually, people, both in this film and I talked to and worked with, they understand that there is very little they can do. They cannot stop pollution, they cannot stop contamination, they cannot stop global warming. They understand that they have to live with this. Their probably strongest appeal is don't mess with this and don't stop us from changing. Don't block us in the ways we have to change our lifestyle, our annual cycle, of the way we travel, the way we hunt, the way we interact with animals. This is a very different message, you know. Don't block our needed move to cope with the changing world. And here, of course, the new hunting regulations or the new policies to be introduced by Fish and Wildlife Services in Canada or in this country, they are really seen by the Inuit as blocking their adaptation. It's, again, another matter which side is right or not, and you know, it is well known that biologists make mistakes, and they're often wrong in their estimates, but not always. So, such as climatologists, they may be wrong, but not always they are wrong. So, with regard to your question about the change in the axis of the Earth, I never heard this.
I'll help you guys out. Yeah. We've been working on that for quite a while. I'm going to close on the adaptation bit. One of the things that we heard repeatedly was that there was a tone of optimism. This idea that a changing environment is intrinsically bad, which we often have in the South. It's like, oh, the environment is changing. Oh, you know, we're kind of getting uneasy about it. In Inuit custom, as Igor was saying, that's normal. The change was normal. There was no necessary patterns required to shift towards a changing environment. It was just part of the cycle of things. And when Inuit were talking about changing species, new animals coming north, changing migration patterns of animals, they were looking at it and going, well, we might benefit from climate change. And if you start to look at some of the literature that's coming out now from geography, there's a new book called The World in 2050 by Lawrence C. Smith, and he is saying that literally as the planet warms around the equator, those areas are going to be baked. They are going to become drought-ridden. They are going to be water-deprived. Essentially, what the geographers are telling us is that human civilization and animal species are moving northward. It's already happening, species are moving northward, but the argument is that in 2050, civilization might be relocating to the northern nations of the world. And if that is true, Inuit communities are in a position to benefit from these new species coming north, from the changing geopolitics. It's their land. And so, once again, to intrinsically say this is bad, takes away from the fact that Inuit are saying, well, we can deal with this because that's what we've always done. And so their message is one of serious impacts, but also a resiliency. They're saying, we have the capacity to deal with this. We've always done this. And I agree wholeheartedly about your comments about don't block us, because they're ready to move. They're ready to do it. And I think the message is, can we say that about ourselves? Are we ready to adapt to climate change, if you want to use that language? Can we do it? Do we know how to go out and find food in our backyards like Inuit, like other indigenous communities? The challenge is on us around how we will deal with this in the South, where we will be affected most. With respect to the tilt of the earth, Zach, do you want to open tilt of the earth? How we kind of started to hear about it, and kind of I'll follow up on your lead.
Excellent. I've heard this about because up here we lose the sun in Igor, we lose the sun for a whole month from December to January, and every time we have the dark period. I mean, 1 hour. I mean, there's a day glow when the sun is not there each noon. But we celebrate, our culture celebrates the return of the sun. So we know where the sun appears over the horizon when it returns. Here we are making this documentary, and elders starting to notice, they're saying that, the sun is a lot higher nowadays, and it sets further over. Could this mean our Earth has tilted a bit? That's what they were saying. And we were in the high Arctic in Resolute Bay. A hunter telling us when they got relocated in 1953 to Resolute Bay, where it's 3 months dark of the year. At noon, there's just an hour of day glow. He was telling us that, you know, when we first got up there, we used to go hunting at the most light of the day, which is noon. And there would be 1 hour chance to shoot a rifle at the animals. And he was telling us today, we have 2 hours. And so you start to think that maybe our world is really tilted. I mean, that's what I was hearing. Inuktitut.
So Zach would come out of literally every interview and he would say to me, "Did you tell him?" And I remember the first time he did it and I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "That elder said it again, that the earth had tilted." And literally every community that we went into, elders were saying the earth had tilted on its axis because the sun, the moon, and the stars were out of position. The different areas we were are geographically dispersed. They're hugely different areas across Nunavut. These people weren't necessarily talking to each other. They likely weren't. And yet, they all had the same observation. I went to the scientific literature. Igor is saying he's never heard of it. There's nothing out there. There's no reported document saying that the earth is tilted on its axis. Indeed, to the contrary, most scientists are saying that it hasn't. This is the context in which we're making this film. We're sitting there kind of scratching our heads going, wow, how do we deal with this information? Elders are emphatic about it. We're hearing it all over the place. And as we continued the process of making the film, we just trusted what the elders were saying. We believed what they were saying. Inuit knowledge, Inuit will not tell you anything that is outside of their personal experience. That is a codified law within the way in which their knowledge systems work. They won't tell you something they haven't actually seen. And given that, we trusted what was happening. And we continued the process of trying to figure this out by contacting different scientists personally. Most scientists said, impossible, the vast majority of them. We started to get into talking to some climatologists. They said, you know, a couple different things, and not until we started talking to atmospheric refraction scientists did we get into the kind of core mechanics of what helps to explain what the elders are seeing. And basically, as climate change warms the atmosphere in the Arctic, weather patterns are changing, wind patterns are changing. You hear in the film, the elders are talking about how the wind is coming from the south now. That hot air is rushing into the Arctic atmosphere. And that hot air is sitting over top of cold surface temperatures. The Arctic is cold. And when you have hot and cold air colliding, it causes what's called an inversion layer. You have this hot air, cold surface temperatures, there's a layer in between. And this inversion layer creates the optimal conditions for refraction. And basically, if the Earth is a sphere, a big sphere like this, when Zach is talking about the sun being below the horizon, it's literally behind the curvature of the Earth. And so if you're here in Igloolik and the sun is below the curvature of the Earth, you can't see it. You can see day glow maybe, maybe not, depending on how high you are. And what is happening is that if an elder is on the side of the Earth with the curve literally in between them and the sun, that hot and cold air inversion layer is causing their light rays to bounce off the atmosphere, back towards the cold surface temperature, back up towards the atmosphere, and they are literally able to see around the curvature of the Earth because of climate change. And essentially what is going on here is that it's a mirage. It's a mirage caused by climate change, which allows people in the north to see the sun above the horizon before it is astronomically predicted. And it's higher in the sky, it's bigger, and it's caused by climate change itself. The visual world of the Arctic has changed because of climate change. And it is amongst the most compelling evidence of climate change existing. The sun is out of position. And interestingly, the scientists missed it. The scientists, and I don't mean to denigrate scientists, but we have to understand how science works. In the Arctic, you're going for field seasons. You're there when the money allows you to be there. You're there when the planes can get in. Inuit are living on the land for entire lifetimes. This observation was made through lifetimes of watching. You can't see it by coming there for a couple field seasons. You have to be a long-time observer. And so the elders were the only ones who had seen this. And as soon as we brought these observations to these very thoughtful, open-minded atmospheric refraction scientists, their jaws dropped. And the actual phenomenon is called the Novaya Zemlya effect. And you know where Novaya Zemlya is. The reason why it's named that is because in the 1500s, some explorers got stuck in the ice there, and due to weather, not climate, change in heating temperatures causing this inversion layer, these explorers saw the sun come up earlier than astronomically predicted by the island of Novaya Zemlya, and they were chastised for hundreds of years for being vitamin C deprived and hallucinating in their boat. And so researchers now know that this Novaya Zemlya effect exists, but the film is the first time that it's ever been linked together, that all these communities in unison are seeing these visual distortions. And so it's proof of a uniform heating across a huge geography of space and time. And when we released the film, and in Canada we've been all over the national news with this, Inuit and Indigenous communities across the north started to contact us and say, our elders are seeing the same thing. So we've had literally communities from across the high Arctic and even in kind of subarctic regions contacting us saying, this is happening in our community as well. And it's proof of a warming world. Maybe another question.
Yes, is it working? I just want to thank you for this film. We've seen a lot of films this year and in the past 10 years, and this, I think, is the most thought-provoking one I've ever seen. The other ones, with all due respect, a lot of them are just enhanced nature films, but this one was thought-provoking, different ideas, and kind of contrasting. I mean, I think we have certain stereotypes of non-scientists, and it's coming out, in some cases, they know more than our scientists. And the woman over here was talking about different thought processes, and it occurred to me, you're saying, how can the Inuit adapt? But why? We are the ones who caused this problem. We are the biggest consumers of energy on the planet. It seems to me, and you did make reference to it, that we have to adapt more, and I don't see much happening on that front. And in terms of the Earth's axis tilting, having never heard of it before, I mean, the earthquake in Japan, scientists did say the Earth's axis did tilt. Minuscule, but it did tilt. So it's not unprecedented. My final question is, this Inuit history, it's an oral history, and it's so valuable. Now that you're using computers and such, would it be within the culture to start, making a written history of this? Because I think it's very important.
Okay, thanks for that question. With respect to the tilt of the Earth, so one of the super interesting things about this is that some of these earthquakes recently have caused a slight shift in the Earth's axis, although it's so minuscule that it hasn't knocked out global GPS or caused issues at airports or anything like that. And the other thing is that we contacted NASA around this, and most of the scientists said, we don't know what you're talking about. But the one guy that we did contact, he's been working on the research he's doing is showing that this ocean thermal expansion, basically the elders in the film are talking about the ocean heating up, and as the ocean heats up, it increases the kinetic energy. The molecules start moving faster, and it actually causes the volume to increase. The oceans get bigger as they get hotter, and as they get bigger, they're actually moving around in the underwater ocean basins, and that movement of water globally has actually caused a slight shift as well that is calculable if you have the precise and very expensive equipment to do so that NASA does. And the researcher I was in contact said, you can't see it though. This is impossible to see. And so this idea of comparing kind of indigenous and scientific knowledge, we actually talked about putting scientists in the film, and we couldn't contextualize it in science. And this gets back to the woman's question around linear thinking, because the researchers were so specific in their expertise. Inuit were talking about all of it. And if we take what they're saying for exactly what it means, they're right about the Earth tilting, but they also gave us new insights into this change in the position of the sun, and it really points to the importance of listening. And Zach, the question about kind of digital orality, how we're collecting this stuff digitally, do you want to speak to the importance of that, but also whether or not we might be writing about this?
I don't know, maybe you should talk more on that, because just a filmmaker. Yeah, we are trying. I mean, we are filming oral history as fast as we can. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to talk about climate change. What we didn't put on the film, but we're noticing is a few years back. I mean, Inuit culture is a hunting culture, so we're always hunting every chance we get. In the summertime, we hunt seals in the sea and shoot it in the head. And a few years back, I noticed that they used to float when you shoot them, because they have so much fat, the seal. In the last 2 years, what we've been noticing is seals are sinking when we shoot them. We know that there's so much fresh water on top of the salt water. When in the past, we know when seals sink, you still could see them floating midway where the salt and the fresh water meet. But in the last 2 years, we've been noticing they're sinking a lot. You shoot them, you only have maybe, I don't know, 15 seconds to get to it. So with these changes, so we also have to change the way we hunt a little. We have to change our travel routes, especially in the springtime when the ice is melting. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, another example of those keen observations. You know, the one elder talking about when the seals dive at an angle as opposed to down. Like, we started to hear these technical understandings of the environment, and it's just mind-boggling the complexity of their understanding. And it's just a different way of thinking. It's a different way of describing it, but no less valid. Still incredibly important, and in many ways links very well with the science. And so, I don't mean to disparage scientists. I'm a scientist myself. It's interesting to kind of look at how these things can fit together and really try to, once again, build that holistic way of thinking with all the ways of knowing. So, any more questions? If we can get a mic to that person, that would be great. We got a couple questions down here as well.
Hi, beautiful film, and thanks for all this great information, insight. I have a simple question. I noticed some of you inserted a little bit of archival footage in there, and I'm just wondering where and when it came from. It's really beautiful, added to the film.
Zacharias, Bernard Saladin?
Yeah. Bernard Saladin is a French anthropologist who worked at Laval University for a good number of years, and while he was there, he used to come here to Inuktitut and film anthropology stuff, what they try to find out. And some of the scenes that he took, which we don't see anymore, dogs towing a dead walrus, which is on the thin ice, and it's sinking because it weighs a ton. They're very valuable footage that I can't get any more. Maybe I could, but not like that anymore. Because film is very interesting, and it worked with us. We had to understand it, and it never dies. We now watch people who have passed away, who we know live and well. It's very nice.
Yeah, the Bernard is getting quite old, and through the process of making this film, we paid, I think it was $30,000 to digitally restore 2 reels of his film footage, and so we've included parts of it. It's amazing stuff. And with that said, Zach's kind of closing idea there, just it never dies. Some of the elders in the film have passed away. It's quite sad. Zach and I just kind of caught news of that. And it speaks to the importance of this living knowledge, right? It's there, and when it's there, it's just very important to recognize it and not take it for granted, because some of these elders in their 80s, 90s, the one elder who said, you know, you think you know the cold? Yeah, he's amazing. Inusik Nashilek. I've spent about 10 years living in Pangnirtung, and I've been adopted by Inuit families there, and my Atatagwa and Anangwa, my Inuit mother and father in the film, they're getting quite old. Inusik's 92 years old. This guy knows things about the environment that the new generation, it's changing fast, and it's very important, once again, to listen to some of these old timers, and yeah, we felt very privileged to talk to some of the elders that we did, and have that document now for the world in perpetuity. Yeah, there's some more questions here. Yeah.
Has the scientific community, as a result of this film, recognized the value that oral tradition in these kinds of societies has for expanding our knowledge of the world? The Polynesian sailors that can go all over, the African bushmen, I would think that there would be a great opportunity for expanding our own scientific knowledge by incorporating all of this oral history. Has there been any thought to doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's been an incredible honor to be able to, you know, I was the only Qapirangajuq, I was the only white dude involved in the whole process of making the film. And it was made in a very Inuktitut way. It was, Zach did the interviewing. The reason why I think this film is different is that it was people in their own communities being interviewed by someone from their community in their own language. And that process of engagement was completely different from the other types of engagements that people normally have been kind of experiencing. There's been lots of research on Inuit knowledge and climate change. This is not a new project by any stretch of the imagination. What is new is the approach. And Zach got into trust-based relationships with people. Our entire film crew was Inuit. And so there was a different dynamic in terms of how that film and that kind of quote-unquote research was conducted. And it was a real honor for me to be involved and to kind of be party to that. And it's also been an interesting process as being the kind of quote-unquote scientist as part of this, because I'm the one communicating some of this science and talking to other scientists. And I think for the most part, people are generally have an open mind. I think that some of the scientific community feels threatened by the film, probably for a very good reason, because the Inuit, because of the process of how the film was made, are actually talking back. You would not hear this kind of narration, this kind of dialogue, had I gone and interviewed the elders. They wouldn't speak to me like that, but they told Zach what they really felt. And so we have this document that really kind of is a true insight into the thinking of a people. And in some ways it threatens some scientists. It pushes their buttons, right? It kind of pushes back on them and says, hey. And so we've caught a bit of flack for that. But I think especially with the tilt of the earth, getting into that information, I've talked to lots of people, and not to put a feather in our own cap, but a lot of people have said that's the most compelling thing I've ever heard about traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge being valuable, being important. Like, it's mind-blowing. And Andrew Weaver, one of the kind of top climatologists in Canada, said that to me last week. I met David Suzuki, who's helped us in different ways. He's a well-known environmentalist and broadcaster in Canada, and he said the same thing to us. And people are responding to that, and I think they're saying, wow, like that really is a good example of how this can help us and help the world think differently. And so I think there's a general openness amongst the scientific community. Once again, I'm a scientist. Igor's been doing this his whole career. Lots of researchers are wanting to do that. But the difference between wanting to do it and doing it in a way that really respects the way in which these communities operate are two different things. And so in Canada, if you want to do research in Nunavut, you have to get a research license, include traditional knowledge in your project. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's included in ways that are useful to the community. Zach said these researchers coming up, putting their thermometers in, and you never hear from them again, right? There's a whole process of engagement that takes time. It takes commitment. It takes being part of the community. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that all researchers are doing it in a way that respects kind of the community wishes in that way. And we're getting closer, and I think that that's really exciting. It's an exciting time for research that's collaborative in that kind of way. But we need to include the community in the way that we do research. And that's, I think, what, once again, helped contribute the insights that this film made was because of the way it was made, the way it was grounded in the community. And so, yeah, I think that there's lots of opportunities.
Thank you very much for an extremely interesting film that highlights the profound knowledge of natural history of the Inuit. Did you speak with elders about any other observations that you did not have enough time to put into the film, other impacts that we've observed in other northern ecosystems, such as changes in lichens, northward shift of vegetation, increase of precipitation falling as rain rather than snow? Any other observations you didn't have time to put in?
Zacharias, Ivili, anything that we didn't put in that you want to talk about? That's a good question.
Yeah, okay. While we were doing this project, there's another thing that I wanted to find out while I had my chance with these elders, was about the Earth Age. Nobody, I mean, people in the Inuit culture, they talk about Earth eggs that are different sizes, some like the goose size and some like the ostrich size eggs of the earth. I know my father talked about it. He said he even ate one. I've seen, I mean, we've seen and filmed one. That was another thing that I wanted to find out, which was more for me, but we collected that and we didn't put that in the film. I mean, we thought maybe we could, but
yeah,
editing.
We had a draft where we included Nunavut earth egg.
Yeah.
And I had heard these stories as well. Atilu?
Maybe that was too, if we had put that would have been too much.
Yeah, if the tilt of the earth wasn't enough, let's start talking about earth eggs. And I've heard these stories as well. They're widespread. You can talk to a 10-year-old kid in any of these communities and say Nunamanik, and they'll be like, yeah, okay. You know, earth egg. It's a well-known, established fact within these communities that the earth as a living organism produces its own eggs. And these earth eggs bore albino animals, sacred animals. And these animals have there's all sorts of stories about these animals. But one of the things that is critical to this story, which is why we were going to put it in the film, is that if you harm an earth egg, if you break an earth egg, the stories are that bad weather will come. That the earth will take revenge for any harm that you cause to its eggs. Which I think we all get what that means here in this room. If you don't believe in the existence of earth eggs, you can understand the metaphor. If you harm the earth, there will be consequences. But Inuit And Zach has seen an earth egg. I've seen the video of it. It's amazing. And the interesting thing is that these albino animals exist. And in Pangnirtung, where I've been, the way that I started hearing about these stories was one of the elders in the film, James C. Mike, started to talk about how this albino raven had come and was near his house. And this albino raven was all over the community of Pangnirtung. And I have photos of it. One of the best photographers in town shot these photos of this albino raven. And for me, there's significance in all of this. And for the communities, they're starting to see these changes that speak to, as what Igor was talking about, the spiritual dimension of their understanding of the universe. And the albino animals have presented themselves. And it starts us to kind of question what's going on. It links to this larger environmental change and is very interesting. And once again, it's this unfortunate thing where we actually had to question whether or not we should include that in the film for fear that Southern audiences would judge, would say, hey, that's crazy. Hey, that doesn't make any sense. Let's dismiss the whole argument. And so we didn't include it in part because of that rationale, but also because the film itself was getting complex, and that was something we decided to take out, but very good question. You have a mic? Yeah.
Is it working?
Yep.
Okay. I almost don't even want to say this right now just because I thought the earth egg thing was a beautiful thing to end on. But I work with kids doing environmental education, and I'm sure that it would be nice to be able to share with them the fact that, as the elders were saying in this film, the polar bears aren't disappearing, they're like in their caves. But that I was wondering, is there any progress being made now to help the polar bears not be collared and not be, messed with, tranquilized and all that? Is there any progress happening with that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's an important one because we didn't quite close the loop on that, and I'm all about closing loops these days. Get away from the linear thinking, make it a loop. The screening we had in Churchill was awesome. We did a panel discussion with Andrew DeRoche, who's amongst the top polar bear biologists in the world right now, and it was tense. That section of the film, which is like 10 minutes long about polar bears, it was like I was like just kind of tensing up in my seat, not sure where it was going. And while some of the researchers were saying really outrageously borderline, if not totally racist things in this Q&A, like we had some serious flack in this session that we had, many of the researchers were really open to hearing what the elders were saying. And that was a really important kind of dialogue to be having. And Andrew DeRoche was talking about how aerial surveys, they're starting to increase the use of aerial surveys. They're starting to work with communities in more kind of engaged ways to make sure that that research is being conducted in a way that doesn't offend the community or harm the bears in that kind of way. And we also, the researchers themselves acknowledge past mistakes. Bears have been killed through the process of research. They know that happens. They're trying to get better at it. They say that gives them the best data on these animals if you can handle them and touch them and take teeth out of their heads and sample them. And it's in some ways very invasive, but they say that they need it to figure it out, what's going on with the bears. And I think the main issue is the way in which scientists often think into the future. Most of the data that is being used to justify this kind of listing of bears as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, specifically in the US, is based on a prediction of where the polar bear population will be in the future. Right now, the polar bear population across most of the circumpolar world is very healthy. You have between 20 and 25,000 bears thought to exist in this kind of entire population. And basically, they're split into 19 subpopulations, and a third of the 20 to 25,000 bears are either healthy, stable, and okay. The other third is healthy, stable, and growing, and the other third is kind of stable and in decline, basically. They're starting to decline. And most of those bears in the kind of third of the overall bears in the world are in the southern end of the range. They're in the Churchill, Western Hudson Bay population. Lots of those areas are adversely affected by climate change, as you'd expect. It's moving northward, as we talked about. And so where we did a lot of those interviews, those polar bear populations, subpopulations are healthy. Inuit are seeing more bears. They're saying it in the film. And so it's a communication breakdown in many ways. If you talk to the polar bear biologists, they'll say, yeah, the bears aren't, extinct. That's not what's happening. But the media grabs that. It's like polar bears are extinct. Polar bears are going to die. It's a communication issue that bogs this down and creates this conflict. And I think we had this dialogue with these researchers, these polar bear biologists, and it's this difference of time scale. Inuit are seeing bears now. They're seeing lots of bears. Polar bear biologists are saying, well, in the future. And so it's this disconnect between time scale, communication, all of these things. And I think that we need to increase that dialogue. We need to figure out how to kind of work together so we can overcome those challenges and not, as Igor is saying, block a way of life and block perhaps a necessary movement towards a species that will provide food and provide livelihood. And so they're very complex issues. And I think this film is really kind of cracking a wedge into that dialogue and saying, hey, this ain't gonna happen. This kind of business as usual ain't gonna happen without people talking back and saying, this is our right to these animals. And so it's very complex. And I think, we're in the US right now. This is the heartland of the polar bear issue right now. The polar bear is the iconic species in the climate change debate. It is the climate change debate. And the decision to list the bear as threatened under the Endangered Species Act has consequences for these communities. It has serious consequences. And, I think it's important that we learn about that before we kind of further make decisions that adversely affect people very far away who have done nothing to contribute to climate change. Igor's going to come in here.
If I may add another footnote. It's indeed a very complicated issue. And the main point is that the Inuit mostly do not hunt polar bear themselves. They don't eat it anymore. They don't have dogs. It's mostly for so-called big game hunters who purchase licenses to come to the Inuit communities and hunt polar bears. And that creates a lot of financial opportunities for the Inuit because they work as, how you call them, operators. What is the proper word for many small local village franchises where a hunter or a couple hunters organize small businesses, and then the big game hunters fly in, and that happens not only with the polar bears but also with moose and other big animals. They fly in, they have the license, they pay big money, and most of these communities are extremely short of cash. And they need more money all the time because the fuel price is going up, because everything is going up. So hunting polar bears or supporting commercial polar bear hunting is becoming the Inuit way to stay with this economy that is going crazy on them. So it is still their way to be on the land, it is still their way to travel, it is still their way to get out, it gives them cash to continue other things that they have to do, like hunting seals or caribou or fishing. But it's not that simple. If we kind of ban commercial hunting of polar bears, which would be kind of a natural thing, let's let Inuit hunt polar bears and ban the commercial hunters from coming to the Inuit land, that would be even more detrimental to the Inuit economy because that would deprive them of that cash, which is so important for the annual economic cycle.
Just a point of clarification, most of the communities operate under quota systems, and basically the communities are allocated a certain amount of bears that they're allowed to hunt, and for the most part, the vast minority of those allowable bears that can be caught under a quota are used for commercial, they call it conservation hunting. The majority of bears that are hunted in communities are hunted for communities. And in the north, Zach could talk about it, people hunt polar bears, they eat polar bears, they make clothing out of polar bears. This is not just a commercial thing, this is a cultural right. It's a cultural rite of passage. It's a food security issue. One of the quotes that you mentioned that we didn't include, my Ananingwa, my Inuit mother, Ibiananilniak, she was talking about how her son caught a polar bear, not me, and this bear had been tagged. And they know it's been tagged because it has a tag in its ear. And when a bear is tagged, Inuit do not eat the meat. They do not eat the meat because in Canada, Health Canada had a warning that you're not supposed to eat polar bear meat that has been tagged within a year of being tranquilized. The polar bear biologists have lobbied saying that the chemicals that are in the bear are not damaging to humans, and they got Health Canada to change the rules to 45 days. Irregardless of timing, if the bear is tagged in these communities, the community will not eat it. Because they just like all of us in this room, we demand quality food. If we can, we'll eat organic food. We'll eat the most healthy food we can. Country food is that equivalent in the north. And people don't eat tranquilized meat. It's not appealing to them. And we have this really heartbreaking piece of interview with Evie where she's saying, you know, I couldn't eat this beautiful, delicious meat because the polar bear biologists had shot it, tranquilized it, and it was really an issue of food security. So that's another dimension of this, is that it's financial, but it's also food security. And so when people are pushing back on these kind of the biologists, this kind of way of thinking around polar bears in general, it's got a lot to do with the very kind of mechanics of how they operate as a people. And maybe Zach, do you have any thoughts on polar bears that you want to kind of leave with people?
Polar bear meat in this area, in our area, is like a delicacy food. You know, in the olden days, we used to hunt bears any amount we want. But then when we went into the quota system, each community is given a quota. Let's say here in Inuktitut, they give us 15 tags for a year, per year. Today we have a new system. We hunt more males than females, and we have to follow that, and we try to follow that. But it's hard sometimes to tell a female bear or a male bear, especially when they're like in the middle ages. But once they grow older, you can really tell what's a male and what's a female. Out of 15 tags, probably 10 of it or 11 of it would go to the local hunters. And here in this community, somebody gets a polar bear, somebody gets a polar bear, and people go on the radio, and we all rush to that house to get our share. That's how it is today. Most of the time, the elders in the community get their special package of bear meat from the hunt. That's how it is. It's what we want to eat. The polar bear meat is, I don't know how would you say it, like smoked meat from swords in Montreal. It's that good. So we eat it. We always eat it. I know when we were shooting this film, we went up to the high Arctic in Reservoir Bay where there's lots of bears, and you could see bear meat outside of people's home, just outside frozen. And in my community, it's more scarce. We have less tags, so that's how this system looks.
But Igor is totally right. Oh, go ahead, Zach.
Not only to sports hunters. Sports hunters, they play the role of the economy. to certain the dog owners, because the system up here, sports hunters can only hunt by dog team. Most of us don't have dog team. The people who, the Inuit who still have dog team are the lucky ones.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, we're going to do one more question.
This is not a deep question, but the sports hunters, I assume they're primarily after the head and the hide. Do they leave the meat for the community, or how does that work?
You want to answer that one, Zach?
Yes, exactly how you said. They get the hide and the head, and the meat is shared in the community.
Yeah. And food sharing in these communities is very, very broad. It's part of the cultural landscape, and part of the challenge, as Igor was saying, is that Inuit have been brought into the modern world. There's boats, there's guns, there's gas, there's bullets, there's store-bought foods, and those all cost money. And the research shows that food sharing for foods that cost actual cash is not as abundant. It's food sharing with traditional foods that permeates the culture. And in many of these places, over half of the food that people consume for their daily caloric intake comes from country foods, and it's sharing. It's giving it away. It's community hunting. And so they just can't underscore the importance of maintaining that kind of country food. That's what they call it, that culture of country food consumption. And the other important thing here is that the seal debate, we see the big cute seals with the eyes, and Greenpeace and organizations like that target the seal. It's a very easy thing to make people go, "Aw," you know, cuddly megafauna, and it draws us in. It grabs at our heartstrings. And the Inuit were living in the modern world by selling their seal skins for cash. When the environmental movement, I consider myself an environmentalist, reading and starting to understand these things, it was a real wake-up call that these kind of best intentions can have really bizarre consequences, and the environmental movement really was the straw on the camel's back that forced people into wage labor in some of these communities. They had to get jobs to be able to continue living because they couldn't trade the sealskin for cash and keep living that subsistence way. And the sealskin economy has tanked because of what's gone on. The polar bear economy is replacing it. That is kind of coming up as the next way to make money in these communities. And once again, the Western world has targeted the polar bear for, just reasons. There's concern around its longevity. At the same time, it's been done in a way that exactly replicates the mistakes of the past. And it's been done in a way that is hurting these communities. And so we need to think critically about our decisions and how we decide to implement our values on other people.
Thank you. Igor?
I just want to end with a little bit of optimistic note.
That's better.
Yeah. There are ways and there are kind of systems that work. Although Ian is absolutely right that replacing one crisis, the seal crisis, with another crisis, the polar bear crisis, is definitely the wrong way to do it. And there are cases when biologists did accept that they were wrong. And one is, or the best one, is with hunting for bowhead whales, who are the biggest and the most charismatic fauna in the north. These huge 40-ton major animals that in the 1970s, biologists said that they are on the verge of extinction. And that at that time, there were only Inuit people, mostly in Alaska, who were hunting bowhead whales. And biologists said it has to stop. It's absolutely irresponsible. The whales would go down. And the Inuit said, "You're wrong. You're not counting them right. You don't know how many of them, and all your models, they are just plain wrong." So the two sides kind of battled back and forth until there was a new model which is called co-management. And this is where both sides kind of share their knowledge, but also their responsibility for the health of the animals. Even though one side, the biologists, are kind of, their role is to protect, and the Inuit role is to hunt, which is to kill. So surprisingly, it worked. First, the Inuit turned out they were right. There were many more bowhead whales than biologists ever counted, because they didn't know how to count them, and that because it is very hard to count whales because they go under the ice, unlike polar bear, you can fly over, but they're also in the snow, in the dens. That's exactly what the elders are saying. Then it turned out that Inuit are very responsible hunters. They don't hunt just to, because they're bloody or because they need cash. They know exactly what it means, how to maintain a sort of a healthy population, because this is their long-term strategy to have whales plentiful and healthy. So what is needed is mutual respect. And this is something that I'm sorry to say both sides have to demonstrate. We won't move anywhere if biologists keep saying that those people know nothing and we are professionals. But we also won't move anywhere if the other side keeps saying that biologists know nothing. Biologists do know something. They may be wrong and they have their own flaws, but these are professional people who spend their life doing what they are doing, and many of them are very knowledgeable. So it's a culture of dialogue. It's a culture of sharing. It's something that I believe is coming one way or another through the climate change, through this crisis with wildlife, through the issues of self-government and other things that are happening in the north. Respect each other, listen to each other, sit and talk. And something may happen out of this, and there are cases when indeed something could happen, because bowhead whale is now healthy and the population is increasing. It's now not listed as a divergent extinction. Inuit keep hunting, so things can be done. Thank you.
Thank you for that point, Igor. Thank you, Zach. Zach, thank you for being with us for an hour. Do you have any last words for us?
Just one of the things that I've heard while I was doing my interviews, you elders always say the animals, when there's too many of them, it becomes a problem. They start to die off, like the caribou. That's another thing I wanted to point out. In the Inuit culture, there's a saying: when animals overpopulate, it's a sign it's not a good sign. I mean, that's all I wanted to say.
Cool. Thank you, Zach. We'll see you in New York.
We'll see you in New York in a couple days. And,
okay.
And thank you, Igor, and thank you, Dr. Ian Mauro, for joining us today. Thank you, audience, for staying so long. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, this program is going to be archived on our webcast site, which is on Ustream. You can send your friends to see the film on the isuma.tv web channel that Zach and company have set up. There are hundreds and hundreds of films by Indigenous filmmakers on there with a lot of similar information, so please go there. And if you're interested in our film programs, please sign up on our email list. We have so many environmental films this year, and I would love to share them with you. Thank you again for coming.